All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I think we've got a few more just being admitted now from the waiting room. We'll get started here in just a second. All right. Welcome to the White House Fellows podcast, where each month I talk to one of my fellow fellows about the program, about our respective years as White House Fellows, and about how the experience changed our lives and careers. We'll also answer your questions as we go, and we'll talk about some tips that we suggest for those who are considering applying. I'm David Moore. I'm the executive director of the White House Fellows Alumni Association. I was a White House Fellow in 1996, 97 during the Clinton administration. During my year as a fellow, I served at the State Department working for the Undersecretary of International Security Affairs. During our podcast today, I'm going to be talking with Catherine C.J. Yerage, who was White House Fellow in 2021, where she served at the State Department as well, working for Ambassador Roger Carstens in the Office of the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs. CJ is a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. She's a C-17 lead airdrop evaluator pilot. And after her fellowship year, she spent a staff tour at NATO Combined Air Operations Center in Udom, Germany. And then this past spring, she led a group of 34 White House fellows and family members on a trip back to Europe, where we traveled from Amsterdam to Normandy as part of the 80th anniversary of D-Day. In June, CJ took command of an air mobility operations squadron, the Masterminds, at Travis Air Force Base in California. And she enjoys traveling with her favorite people, her spouse, Eddie, and her two daughters, Samantha and Marlo. CJ and I are going to talk for about 30 minutes about our experiences, and we're recording this portion of the podcast so that we can later share it. About halfway through, we're going to go ahead and stop recording, and then we'll take your questions so that you can feel free to ask anything you like, and we'll do our best to sort of give you our advice and guidance about the program. So let me begin by sharing a few sort of technical details of the White House Fellows Program. It was created in 1964, and White House Fellows have served through the last 11 presidential administrations. Typically, the President's Commission selects about a dozen or a few more White House Fellows each year. The range is 11 to 19. This year's class has 15. That's fairly standard. A total of 894 people have been selected as White House Fellows over the 59-year history of the program, and there are 814 living fellows right now. It is a nonpartisan program, and this is one of the most distinctive characteristics of the program, especially given that we're in Washington, D.C. in a very politically polarized time. Many times, people who are Republicans serve in Democratic administrations, and those who are Democrats serve in Republican administrations and vice versa. Applicants come from across the country and across a range of career fields. There is no specific career field that you have to be in order to apply as a fellow. And then once selected, fellows are placed across the executive branch of government, and they serve for a year as special advisors to a senior White House official or cabinet member. There are only two eligibility requirements to apply to be a White House Fellow. As I said, you can come from any background or profession. All you have to have done is completed your undergraduate degree by the time you apply, and you must be an American citizen. We have quite a number of frequently asked questions on our website. And when we go to the Q&A session, I'll show you exactly where those are so you can see. Hopefully, they'll address a lot of questions that people often have. And then, of course, we'll talk some more about that. So that's what we're going to cover today. And with that, let me begin by asking CJ. So, CJ, how did you first learn about the White House Fellows Program, what made it interesting for you to apply to?
So for me, it was actually a mentor that I was working with. We talked about at a certain point in my career, I'm expected to go to professional military education, and we were just talking about different options out there. But it was at the time Lieutenant Colonel, now Colonel Carrie Fleming, who had been a fellow prior, that knew that I was incredibly interested in international relations and then trying to look at things from a strategic level. So she said, "Have you heard about this?" And I said, "No." And then she described it, and I thought, "Oh my goodness, how could I possibly compete with something like that?" But she just encouraged me to take a look and said, "Hey, like you just need to be competitive. You just need to show a record of the fact that you've been leading within your industry or where you're working, and that you have this belief in service." And I thought, well, I don't know how to put on paper. I don't do all these extracurricular things for service. And she pointed out to me that I forgot that military is considered a service. So for me, at least, it was easy to tap into that piece. But what really appealed to me about it was that you were going to be around this group of people who believed in giving back and in service in general, and that they would do it within the scope of how they believe service could apply, right? And we all look at it through a slightly different lens, but the incredible thing is that the group as a whole just believes in giving back, and whether that's at a local scale, a state level, or a federal level, but you get to have um, this fellowship with others in that direct purpose.
Indeed, indeed. Well, the application process is quite rigorous, and I'll sort of summarize the major chunks of that. There's a written application, and then from that written application, there are then a series of regional interviews across the country, and then from those regional finalists, and they typically select 108 regional finalists every year. From those, about 30 national finalists are selected, and then from those 30 national finalists, a group of about 15-ish or so are selected to be White House Fellows. And that process is quite intense as you go through it. Uh, but it was even more so, CJ, in your year because of COVID. And so
Yep.
I believe your class was the first selected entirely, and the only one, as far as I know, selected entirely by Zoom. Is that right? So,
It was, yeah. We there was the big question of were they even going to have a
yeah,
fellowship that year, right? We didn't know what that was going to look like, but I'll tell you, it's a testament to the program in and of itself that fellows just think outside the box, right? And they figured out a way to can still conduct interviews. And in my opinion, one of the best classes that you guys have been able to put together purely virtually. So
well, the interviews, whether they were virtual or in person, as they are now, or in my year, typically tend to be the same thing, about 20 minutes long, and you'll have two or three people in the room with you as you're interviewing, and they'll ask you all kinds of questions. And what I often tell people is, listen, they've probably got three or four questions each that they want to ask you. So if you spend 20 minutes answering the first question, that's not the way to make a good impression. So you want to be succinct. You want to get to the point as quickly as you can. Are there any interview moments that stand out from your experience, CJ?
uh, two that I can think of, one of which is being asked to compose a haiku on the fly. And I think they just wanted to see how whether you could own up to remembering how many syllables are per line or not, and then being able to try and put that together. But then being asked my biggest failure, which I kind of pushed back on because I told them I don't believe in failures. Failures are just mistakes you don't learn from. So then I got pushed back on that. But then I gave my answer, and it was on purpose just to see how I would respond. Like they said, "Is that really your biggest failure?" You know, kind of poking holes, which was wonderful just to see. Can you keep your poise? Do you stand by what you have to say? But I will say, for most of the interviews, probably all of them, it was hard not to be. I wish I could have been interviewing the people that were interviewing me, because it's such a wonderful group of people they put together for regionals and for nationals. Just fascinating folks that I wanted to learn more about. So it felt very flip flop that they were asking questions about me when it's people that have done these amazing things that I just wanted to know more about them and ask their questions of like what prompted you to do those things. So um, but it was wonderful because you're just in a virtual room at that time full of
Yeah.
people who are just curious about one another.
Yeah, yeah. I would say most of the questions, the the haiku example is not the norm.
No.
Most of the questions, and when I served on the commission, what I tried to do was pose questions similar to what a White House fellow would experience in their work placement, which was if you were asked, let's say hypothetically, you are selected as a White House fellow and you're placed at the Department of Transportation, and you show up at your placement one day, and you got to take the elevator up to your office. And as you walk in the elevator, Pete Buttigieg is standing there next to you, and he's the only other person in the elevator. And as you go up, you introduce yourself, say, "Hey, I'm a White House fellow." And he says, "Well, what do you think are the most important things we ought to be focused on at the Department of Transportation?" And you got 30 seconds, go. And so
Yeah.
that's a wonderful sort of example. I think many of the questions asked during both regionals and nationals um, are can often be some variation of that to see how you would give succinct advice in quickly, get to the point right away. CJ, you also have a very unusual experience, I think unique in the history of the White House Fellows, in terms of um, uh, your interview experience at nationals. Can you share that with us?
Sure. I will say that I think just throughout my career, I am a benefactor of wonderful luck and timing. I was very lucky that we did nationals virtually because I was 9 months pregnant approaching and thought, well, this is going to be a fun roll of the dice. And ended up having my youngest Marlo a couple days prior to, I think about a day and a half prior to the start of the nationals, and was super perturbed because she was my second child that I had not left the hospital yet. And had a conversation with my spouse of like, maybe it's just not my year. And he said, oh no, just sit over there in the corner. And I had brought, I guess, appropriate professional attire and started the nationals from the hospital, which I guess perhaps contributed to making myself memorable. um, but it was a
Very
wonderful
likely.
conversation. I'll tell you, it was wonderful because it prompted all of us to talk more about families and like personal
Yeah.
things that we were going through, and bringing out a whole other side, which we all think we need to lead with that professional piece, but
Mhm.
that's only part of who we are.
Yeah.
So it was great because I think our class had Steve had had his daughter 3 months prior. Brian's daughter was due the next month. So it was a wonderful group of all these professional, high achieving folks also talking about their experiences with young children, which was a wonderful point of connectivity.
Indeed, indeed. Um, well, and that brings up an important point. The class members that you share this fellowship year with, um, I often say that there are four distinct components of the fellowship year. There's the work experience where you're placed, working in a department or an agency or the White House. There's also the education program where you have an opportunity to get together with speakers from for off the record discussions over lunch at the White House Fellows Office with the rest of your classmates. And there's the travel component, domestic policy trips, sometimes international policy trips as well. But the fourth, and in many ways, I think most significant element or benefit of the program is that set of relationships you develop with your classmates, all of whom come from very different backgrounds and experiences and parts of the country and different perspectives. Um, Tell us, CJ, a little bit about your class and um, uh, have you stayed close? Have you stayed in contact? Tell us about your classmates.
Oh, absolutely. So I was found myself with 13 of my new best friends. They talk about you don't expect to make close friends beyond college, but these are 13 other individuals that I know I could call at the drop of a hat, and they would drop everything just to make sure that we can get after objectives together. We had such a wonderful variety. We had 6 women in the cohort. Um, our class tended to be a little bit more military heavy, whether people were active or had prior experience. But then we had Pia Dandia, who started high school in Harlem, and every single one of her seniors that graduated went on to the college of their choice. Jonathan Westbrook, who's a police officer from Kansas City, Kansas, and Travis Thule, who had like several patents for things he had invented. So um, I just felt so blessed and lucky to be amongst this amazing group of people who come from all over, have different backgrounds. I mean, Alexis Juskis can speak, I think, 6 languages, David. Um, and
including fighter
I'm still
pilot.
exactly, and I'm still working on English.
Yeah.
So, but it's I think that absolutely, when you talk to most fellows, they talk about that's what makes the fellowship what it is. And we still communicate to this day. We have our own group chat on Slack. We have Zoom calls. We have our fantasy football league that I have yet to win, but we're trying. Um, so they and we're still encouraging each other in our professional endeavors as we go forward in the different things that folks are getting after. And there's congratulations over new children, over achievements there, over professional achievements, personal achievements. And we do our best. We're looking at trying to get everybody together here in the next few years, since it's been a few years since we all left the fellowship in 21. But absolutely the highlight of the fellowship is getting to do that, and then also connecting the network further with other alumni within the program and things that
Mhm.
people we've gotten to meet.
Yeah. Let's talk about your placement for a minute. After White House Fellows are selected, they come back to Washington, D.C. for a week to do a series of placement interviews across the executive branch. And I remember, I interviewed at a couple of places that I wanted to, like the National Security Council and the State Department. But then I interviewed places that I hadn't even, considered, like the Department of Energy, the Office of National Drug Control Policy, the Vice President's Office, and some others. And that sort of series of interviews is very different from the selection interviews we go through, in that they're trying to find a good match for your skills, what the agency or department needs, and what you're hoping to work on. Some people come into the fellowship and want to stay very much in the lane that they know. Give a great examples. Many times doctors come in with a perspective that they want to work at Health and Human Services, and many have, certainly. But some of the most enriching and fascinating fellowship experiences are where people come in and go to a completely different area than their normal area of expertise. And what they find is that, um, here's how I would describe it. When you're working for a senior official, there are no cookie cutter solutions that are already in the handbook of how to run that agency or department. And so issues and decisions that come up to the senior level of management require a fresh perspective. And I think that's one of the reasons that fellows are often successful at those levels, because they do bring that sort of broad-based perspective, not necessarily a deep and narrow perspective along a particular issue. So CJ, you and I both, as just by chance, went to the State Department. I went there, I think, in large measure because I had a great relationship with the chief of staff during the interviews, and my principal went to she and I shared the same alma mater. So she said, "Oh, yeah, I want the Duke guy." Um, but tell me about your interview at State Department, and then what you wound up working on while you were there. How did that go?
Absolutely. So like you, I had interviewed different offices. In fact, when I got an interview with Department of Transportation, they said, "Oh, if you're going to come work for us, we assume we'll put you in FAA." And I thought, I don't want to do airplanes. I've been airplaning it for a while. I want to do something different. So high on my list had been OMB, which who knew that was going to be an interest, but the principal there was pretty amazing. And then State Department, it turns out the counselor, his nephew flew C-17s, and I had actually flown with him before. So you're right. I think the same thing, where it's we just kind of ended up connecting over something similar. But the interesting that happened for me with State Department is that they placed me at State Department. I think we both wanted to end up. They wanted me. The best advice I got was like, treat it like dating. Do you want to spend a year with this person? And they ended up letting me interview around State Department to find out which office within State Department I got to go to. I don't know if they're still doing that or if it was just at the time. But it was kind of funny. I had like 3 weeks of like rain around State Department, getting on these different principals' calendars to talk to them about what they were doing. And I was told that the liaison was called by one of the principals and said, "Well, how did we do with the interview?" Which felt really weird because this is a like ambassador level or undersecretary, and they want to know how my
How
interview
did
with
we
them
do in
went.
our interview with CJ? Yeah,
It was a little weird.
nice.
But I ended up being placed. I really wanted to work in humanitarian affairs. So I ended up being kind of shared between J and then democracy, human rights, and labor. But my year was a transition year. So as things as they found out that the current administration wasn't going to be staying, my principal took wonderful care of me and took me over and said, "Hey, do you want to meet our nation's chief hostage negotiator?" And I'm like, has anybody said no to that?" And they brought me to meet Ambassador Roger Carstens, the special presidential envoy for hostage affairs. And he was talking about how this was still a lean, mean team that they were building up. And that if I ever wanted some work or wanted to come work for them, I could. And I thought, well, yeah, I'll go clear out my desk now. I absolutely want to come work for you. So I ended up getting to work for them. And what I will say is that I had no experience in hostage affairs or working with the arbitrarily detained or what the US calls wrongfully detained. But right away, they gave me the international portfolio where I was working with partners from Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the UK. And I also was leading our team that's synced with the Department of Treasury on the Robert Levinson Act that was passed by Congress and instituting how those sanctions are going to play out between Treasury and State Department. Um, Funny anecdote, my first meeting that I had for the international portfolio, Canada's taking roll of everybody who's there, and they said, "Okay, and the U.S." And I just kind of sat there quietly, and then they had to say it again before I realized that I was America on that phone call, which was a very weird place to find myself in, but kind of cool at the same time. So I was very blessed in where I ended up, and then I had an amazing principal, and Ambassador Carstens is doing just wonderful things with that position, and really getting after some major issues that are happening on the international stage.
Thank you. Well, you mentioned that you served in a transition year, and so did I. I was in the transition from Clinton 1 to Clinton 2. And the next class of fellows that will be starting here in just a couple of weeks, actually, I think they start next week, they will be going through a transition year as well, inevitably, either from the Biden to the Harris administration or from the Biden to the second Trump administration. So tell us a little bit, CJ, about what your experience was like during the transition itself, because I think this gets to a sort of important point about both the nonpartisan and the non-political nature of the White House Fellows.
Absolutely. So it was definitely a challenge depending on where we were placed during the transition year. Like for me, my principal was the only one of the only ones that was actually kept on between administrations. But I think it's easy to argue that hostage affairs is a bipartisan issue. Everybody agrees hostage taking is bad. For some of my other fellows, they end up having to be moved from one office to another because just based on how the two administrations got along or didn't get along, however we want to say that,
Mhm.
it just, even if we're a nonpartisan program, it was just in their best interest to move to a different office, which in itself was also really, really cool. That they got to see different perspectives from different levels and different offices. So, like Steve Claggett got to go work for the second gentleman before I believe he was at Commerce. So um, those changes were good. We had to be patient, especially with President Biden's 100 days when that started, because everybody was at home doing telework. So if they hadn't already met the new folks coming into the office, that was a bit challenging. But what was
Mhm.
really cool is that the fellows just really took ownership of what we had going on, and we started setting up our own meetings with different leaders in the civilian and public sector and having our own conversations and really leaning into that part of the fellowship while we waited for the office work portion to catch up.
Mhm.
Um, but it was incredible. And what I will say about, especially because our transition year was from one party to the other, what I can say is that from both sides, there's amazing people working in both parties trying to get after some pretty awesome things. So
Yeah.
regardless of political affiliation, getting to see the people side of it and how people are so passionate about trying to move things forward really just kind of makes you proud in what we do.
I would agree 100%. Um, I was absolutely um, pleased with every person that I've worked with in both administrations. In the White House Fellows Office in particular, but even the other folks in the White House have been terrific. You see a whole lot of negative press at times, but when you get down into into the 95% of government that's working day to day, it's very gratifying and rewarding to see how much everybody's working together toward, a common goal. And I think that was certainly my experience and has been through. I've now, in my role, I've now supported, the President's Commission during both the Obama, the Trump, and the Biden administrations. So, and I would say they've been terrific folks associated with all of them. So we've got just a few more minutes here before we open it up to Q&A. Before we do that, CJ, what advice would you give people who are thinking about potentially applying for the program? How would they know that this is something right for them? What should they go into it expecting to get out of the experience?
I think that if you want to have that established community of others who are looking to serve and to then also be able to see things from a federal, I mean, strategic level of how our government is working, then this is absolutely the right place for you. I think that you gain a community that is hard to find in that similar interest, while also getting to have just life-changing experiences, meeting some amazing people. I mean, my fellowship year, we met with 4 different presidents. We got to meet Elon Musk and go see Starbase down there in Texas, and have these amazing off the record conversations where you can, get into the minds of people who are influencing where our nation is headed, um, and get that layer of understanding. So as you proceed forward, you've been empowered with this knowledge, and you have this ability to, I guess, share the message, but also influence which way we're going.
Indeed. Super.